Today, we can all easily remember all those who have fallen in the attacks in Brussels. It was only yesterday when we all changed our profile pictures in memory of those who have fallen in the Paris attacks. So who will it be tomorrow? Will it be us? We are all anxious to await the next terrorism attack, and many of us feel as if there is nothing we can do to stop it. We feel helpless against the fight against terrorism, and there's groups like ISIS that we can't really figure out how to stop. This has led me to ask a lot of questions as to why such a barbaric group has been able to sweep fear into the back of our minds. And then how do we stop them? There are several things we need to understand about ISIS, but I'd like to clear up the mass confusion about how we stop them. In this speech, I will give background knowledge about ISIS and explain what they are trying to accomplish. And then I will talk about the prominent leaders in our country and their plans on how to stop them. And then I'll give you my take on how we can destroy ISIS once and for all. So let's start off by going a little bit in depth about the rise of ISIS. ISIS is a relatively new terrorist organization, and it has been growing rapidly over the past few years. ISIS is an extremist group of Sunni Muslims whose stated goal is to establish a new caliphate in the Middle East. According to Time magazine, a caliphate is an Islamic empire, and its leader is said to be the successor to the Prophet Muhammad. ISIS follows a very strict conservative interpretation of Islam and label any who don't comply as infidels. The group got its start in the 90s, but was very small and had very little organization. It only began to grow after the last American troops left Iraq back in 2011. This led to a lesser security and led to tensions between the different groups of Muslims, which has allowed ISIS to flourish. Then in more recent times, Syria began a civil war against their president, Bashar al-Assad. Because Syria shares a border with Iraq, it made it easy for ISIS to move in, according to Free Zakaria, who is a CNN analysis. ISIS have been able to recruit a great number of Syrian rebels into its organization as they fought against al-Assad. At this time, ISIS has become known for their extremism and also for their cruel treatment of prisoners and captured locals, usually killing anyone who disagrees with them, like execution style. This is a current map of where ISIS is and where they operate, and you can see they're mainly in Syria and Iraq. And they have really brutal tactics, and it's really hard to win against them. And it's really hard to imagine why anyone would like to join them, but people do. While Iraq and Syria ISIS fighters are fighting in wars, we have seen an uptick in ISIS recruitment in the Western world. Most of these recruits are actually not well versed in the Quran and had only been in a casual upbringing in Islam. It is this precisely this lack of knowledge that makes them vulnerable to recruiters. ISIS is in a little way like an American gang. It's seen as cool, and it's kind of like a clique thing to do. And it's okay. Now that you know a little bit of background about ISIS, let's take a look at how people plan to stop them. One of the biggest questions in this election cycle has become, how do we stop ISIS and the threat of terrorism? National security is a big topic, and we hear the arguments for more national surveillance. According to an online article by U.S. News, Senator Ted Cruz said surveillance in Muslim neighborhoods in the U.S. must be intensified. A direct quote from Cruz is that we need to empower law enforcement and to patrol and secure Muslim neighborhoods. But I see this as problematic because that is just a way to alienate Muslims more in America, which could lead to even more radicalization. Trump has proposed temporarily ban on foreign Muslims from even entering the U.S., but once again, it actually does little to stop anything. It actually causes more ISIS sympathy in Muslim communities as they are alienated. With those being at home, now let's take the fight abroad. Ted Cruz said that we should carpet bomb them during the Fox News Republican debate. Hillary Clinton's stance against ISIS is very different from Senator Cruz's. According to Scott Lowe from Quora.com, Clinton mentions using social media to counter their propaganda, as well as putting more resources into addressing radicalism in youth in America and in Europe. Hillary Clinton has also called for more Allied planes, more airstrikes, and a broader target to set to combat ISIS, but she has said not to call for ground troops. But I question if that is such a good idea, considering the messes we have encountered every time we have gone into the Middle East. This leads to what I personally think should be done in the fight against ISIS. To defeat ISIS once and for all, we need to basically destroy their money supply. ISIS gets a lot of donations and funding from private contributions from places like Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia is considered an ally of the United States. The problem is that Saudi Arabia is a theocratic monarchy that governs based on interpretation of Sharia law, extreme interpretation of Sharia law. It's so extreme that it's been compared to ISIS. The New York Times is quoted as saying Saudi Arabia is an ISIS that made it. We must cut ties with Saudi Arabia, as well as the rest of the world should. This means that we have to pull out all our oil consumption in that region. According to OPEC, Saudi Arabia produces 11 million gallons of oil per day, and it's the Western world that consumes it. We're indirectly funding ISIS by supporting Saudi Arabia. We must also not alienate Muslims in the Western world by basically insulting them on their religion. Majid Nawaz, an ex-extremist who was in ISIS, said that the best priority, people in the Middle Eastern appearances, ISIS only grew more support. Those are two things that I think are very important in the fight against ISIS. In conclusion, I hope that I have shed some light about what exactly ISIS is and how we can stop them. There is no simple solution, but as the problem grows, we must take action.